pretty much big deal of it because last time that we were here we talked about it. We talked about some the originality of it with Christopher Alexandra, and we talked about its application in this course as a methodology, how we are going to look at the urban fabric. So this is, I'm sure you made a pretty much a very big milestone. So this is good. I'm not going to do that. And our guest lecturer of today is going to take you through this Patal language again. And I hope you are going to enjoy the lecture. So I'm going to hand over the floor to her, and you guys enjoy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Shema. I will jump in quickly before we hand over to Professor Kai. Well, it's our third class, actually, but the second lecture for the pattern language course. I hope you're enjoying it thus far. I know it's very fast-paced, but that's what it has to be. Um, so let's start with reviewing um, the assignments. Thank you for all attempting to do this assignment. I'll just give a few pointers from what I observed. Overall, it was a good attempt, but some of you misunderstood the assignment and did not summarize all the pages. So if I asked you to redo the assignment, please do that. Then some were not summarizing, they were just copy-pasting from the book. So that is not how you summarize. You're supposed to read, understand, and then summarize from your understanding. So also for those that were doing that moving forward, please learn how to summarize. Then a few of you only did one part. So the assignment was two parts, if you remember. We had to read about 14 pages and summarize, and then we also had to pick 3 patterns from the town section. So some of you didn't do the 3 patterns. You only did the first part. So if I asked you to please do the second part of the assignment, go ahead and do it. Then almost the entire class only read the first 10 patterns of the town section. There is this city country fingers. Like half of you had that pattern. There are 94 patterns to deal with towns. Each of you picking 3 is still not going to, like, there shouldn't be any repetition, right? Because 25 times 3 is about 75. So, well, you're going to have to read them anyway during this course, so I don't know what you're dodging. A few of you, maybe 1 or 2, tried with the AI thing. Those who are in my urban informalities class know that that's not going to work. AI cannot do your assignments. So I think I wrote in your book somewhere, whoever attempted to use AI, that you used AI to summarize. Nothing against AI, but it cannot read for you. So if you could read, have your own understanding, write, and then use it to clean up your text. But you cannot copy the text from the book, put it in AI and ask it to summarize. So yeah, redo the assignment. I think I put a star if I sensed AI. And book, if it has a name. Okay. So I just want a few volunteers to share what they learned from their summaries. Should I randomly pick? Okay, so 2 volunteers. No one? Okay, I'm going to use the class list. Edgar, another one. 3. Mary? Yes. Tony? Yes, please come up, the 3 of you. Edgar, Mary, and Tony.
Good afternoon, everyone. Um, so, I know many of us picked literally almost the same thing, and we were so enthusiastic about whatever we learned. So, one of the things I appreciated after reading this, because my first question was, when we started this course, was, what is a pattern language, So, while reading, I realized a pattern language, let's start from pattern. It is simply a problem that keeps recurring, yeah? And I think all of us saw it while we were reading. But within that very pattern, there are solutions, which is the heart of it all. And I will quote I would say counselor, one time said, to solve a problem, you have to get the cause of the problem. So when I read about these patterns, I realize that it's a chain reaction. One thing leads to the other. And you have to keep getting a solution for that one thing to solve another, then connect it to another to get a bigger thing. So that is one thing that really stood out for me. And I'm sure all of us connected it to our lives, because we all see patterns in our lives, and that is something that is really beautiful about this book, about design, and it really stood out for me. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. One thing I learned about the pattern language, it is we can have a combination or a strategy of different pattern, which eventually have each one of them a relationship. So just as my colleague has mentioned, you will find that one pattern may be, for example, let me say, take a group of people, but you find that in that group of people, there are so many other small patterns, which eventually, by interconnecting each of those patterns or marrying them together, we eventually come up with a solution. That's what I learned.
Good afternoon. Basically, for me, what I learned is the importance of the patterns. That they go beyond even just architecture and urban planning, but even we can use them in our daily routine. Because if you study the patterns, the pattern language program of design, approach of design starts from, maybe as students, we can start as starting from Lucky, his patterns of life. We go to Jacob, and we put all that data together. We study as an architecture class, then we can go to maybe a further bigger picture. And all these patterns, they don't work alone, like each follows the other. For example, the patterns I looked at, for example, the City of Fingers, which looks at as a solution to urban sprawl. So the City of Fingers, you find that it works with the less of streets and all the other patterns, so it's difficult to separate all of them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to our volunteers. I'll leave this list here for random selection. Okay. Then let's also review our class last week. So again, I'm going to pick randomly from the list. I want to hear your thoughts on some of the themes that came out from the discussion from the Banachibuga Street Mines and the LC1 chairperson. I assume you are all paying attention. And so I want someone to speak on the theme of informal versus formal, which was very strong, I think, in the first presentation. Also about community youth groups and their activities, and about the governance of Kampala City. So in no particular order. Oh, Tony, you're willing to do one? Thank you. Tony is going to do, which one do you want to do? Okay. Informal versus formal. Is there another volunteer? Okay, Henry, which one will you do? Community youth groups. And the last volunteer? To speak about governance, so what the LC1 was speaking about. Yes, Matthew. Okay. Thank you.
So basically, on informal versus informal, just as the presenters presented it to us, how we will have like a formal sector, then the informal sector people perceive as a slum, but then the idea that they had, it is however much we are informal, how can we come up with something, pass it through a process for it to be formal. So it's like they have an input of we want to develop this, then the process is how can we make it more formal, which eventually becomes the outcome or the output. That's how I got it.
Thank you, Tony.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm supposed to share about community groups. And one thing that we learned from last week's site visit was that in Chititali Zone 12, there is an operation of very many groups, community groups, that cut across different youth circles. And one of them was Banachibuga Street Mines. And one thing that I really learned is how all of these start with an idea, and then they have to go through the formal stages for it to become a reality. And from the chairman's speech, we saw how these have impacted the community positively. And then from the side work, we saw, for example, how the different groups with Banachibuga having the skate park is having a positive impact on the community, the kids, and even the other people that we found later on enjoying the skate park. And then further on, we went to, for example, the island, seeing these people coming together to do some agriculture so that they can earn from it and also have something to eat. And also the boxing. So these groups have made the place vibrant and also have made a positive impact because they believed in the ideas and they're working so hard to make it a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Henry.
Good afternoon, everyone. As for the governance of Kampala City, we learned about how it starts at the LC1 level, who is responsible for the sub-parish, and it goes on up to the LC5, and the zones keep getting bigger. However, all these local councils each have a representative of the community. So the youth are represented, the elderly, the disabled, and other various groups within the community. So from the LC1, if a case can't be resolved, they take it to the LC2, who handles it at a parish level. If that can't be handled, they go on further up to LC5, who is responsible for the entire district. And that is how the governance is able to notice and solve issues at every scale. So if a project is too big for the LC1, the chairpersons of the LC1 committees in that district go to the LC2, and so on and so forth. So you find that the entire city is under a centralized kind of local council where the issues can be passed down from a community member up to the highest local council chairperson.
Thank you. Thank you to our volunteers. I encourage the rest of you to pick a leaf. Okay, so I guess at this point we are all able to see some kind of patterns happening in Chitintale, be it with the community groups, be it with the governance. I don't know what struck your eye during the visit, but is that something we are able to appreciate? Well, it better be, because the next assignment for this week, I'll share the screenshot in the WhatsApp group, but we are going to document at least 10 patterns from the site visit in Chitintale. So please reflect on the talk from the LC1 and from the Banachibuga street mines, and also your observations from the tour. And good for you that they should be up, so if you need to refresh your memory, and use a similar format as described in the book. Some of you in your summaries, you are able to highlight that there is a format, which is good. So try and be inspired by the way the format is. And this is due before next week's class, so you will leave your notebooks at the entrance to the lecture next week. Same resources, but if I have more, I'll share on the group. Do we have any questions up to this point? Clear? The assignment is clear? Good. So next week's class will be a guest lecture from the Acting Director of Physical Planning, KCCA, and she will speak about a review of Kampala's urban governance. So from top down, the LC1 gave us from bottom up how he answers to, but she will explain the top structure, and she will also explain how they view informality, right? So I think it's an interesting thing to juxtapose what she'll share versus what we saw and what they shared. Keep time, same venue. So for today, we are having a lecture from a distinguished professor, Jiashu Kai. She will introduce herself. She's from Hong Kong, but she's well-traveled, very well-educated, and she's what you would call an expert in the application of this methodology, the pattern language. So she's going to share her work on it and how she's been able to push the boundaries of this method. Please pay attention, please ask questions. But Professor, I'm leaving this list here, so if you need to pick on anybody, just say any name and they will speak. Okay, let's give a round of applause, please.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to come over here. First, I will give a short introduction of myself. And my name is Jiashu Cai. I'm actually Chinese Korean, so probably this is also the first time you know this. So I did my bachelor and master of architecture in mainland China. And after that, I went to the Netherlands, TU Delft. So I did my PhD there. So we were alumni from TU Delft. And after my PhD, I was working in the Netherlands for a while. So I was in the Netherlands for around 8 years. And after that, the COVID exploded, and then I went back to mainland China, visited my mother. And I wasn't able to get out anymore. So I stayed in China and worked in Shenzhen, also as assistant professor for around 3 years. And last year, I moved to Hong Kong. So currently, I'm working at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. That's a university that ranked 38 in the world ranking. And it's a very comprehensive international university. And we have got quite a lot of African students there as well. So currently, there are a few professors from the School of Architecture have projects in Africa, and we also recruit African PhD students. So Hong Kong government has got quite some scholarships for international students to do PhD there. So, so if you are interested, please check us out. And welcome to apply for our PhD program. And of course, masters as well. Yeah, it's a quite interesting city, very dense. So talking about the pattern language, I personally think it's a very powerful tool, even though it was introduced in the 60s in the last century, right? But still nowadays there are still a lot of people working with the pattern language. And for my PhD dissertation, let's say 1/3 of my PhD dissertation is about pattern language, because I was dealing with developing design methodologies to help urban designers in the urban design process for my PhD thesis. And a pattern language was one of the design methodologies I talk about. So probably that was why Brazil knows about me. And today, the lecture is called A Pattern Language and its Contemporary Application in Education, Research, and Practice. So I think that all of you have known a lot about pattern language, the basics. I'm not going to talk about that. I'm more talking about how this, let's say, outdated methodology is still quite popular nowadays, and how this could be applied in the contemporary projects. Because I feel like, because from what we have described, I feel like you have got an understanding of this approach, and now you are at a phase that you are really going to write individual patterns and to apply that in your projects to find problems and find solutions. So I think indeed this is the right timing to give you short introduction of the application, because I hope this could give you some inspirations. So how can you write it? How can this help you in your design? So today's lecture consists of 2 parts. The first part is very basic explanation of the theory, and you know about it already, but I will be mainly focused on the second part, application. So we all know that pattern language was introduced by Christopher Alexander in the 60s, and this was his most famous 3 books. So The Timeless Way of Building, which introduced the theory and how can you use pattern language, right? So if you want to know the overall state of art, please read the first book. And the second book, Pattern Language, itself is like a dictionary. So you can take that as a dictionary when you try to define the patterns in your own context. You can go through the list there and to see what are the individual patterns might be relevant for you, and you can take it from there. And of course, you can also develop your own patterns. I will talk about it later. And then, so how to use the book of a pattern language, because there he has 253 individual patterns. You are not gonna read everything. So my suggestion would be you just go through the list and pick up something, maybe around 20 patterns. And the third one is called the Oregon Experiment. So that was a kind of application of a pattern language theory and the tool in his own practice. So again, this was his thing, right? And then talking about individual patterns, I think you all know about individual patterns, right? How it is composed, how it consists, I suppose. So it has a name, a number, and a picture. They all know about this, right? Okay, but you know that when you write pattern language, it could be a physical space. So for instance, a small public square. It could also be an event that recurring all the time in the built environment. So for instance, this one is called dancing in the streets. So it could be a streets, it could be an event, a ritual, habits. So it could tackle about the social aspect, could also be physical. And then, there are some criticism about pattern language. Some architects apply that in their own context, and they were saying that this is too general. It's very difficult to be context specific. And then one of Christopher Alexander's colleague, his name is called Salingaras. So he is a professor now at, they all know about this as well, right? Oh, okay. So, okay. And now I'll explain about this Salingaras. So, Christopher Alexander had these books and about individual pattern, 253. But when people apply that in their own context, they were criticizing that. They say these are patterns that could be used everywhere in the world, but I'm working in a specific context. And this is not specific enough. So some people were criticizing about it. And then one of the very important professor, his name is called Salingaras. He was working with Christopher Alexander, and he wrote a book. He wrote an article. Probably you can read about this article in 2000. So he was actually explaining why those people say it's not really useful in their context. It was because they only use individual patterns. But there is something called the pattern language, and there's something in between individual pattern and the pattern language. That is called cluster of individual patterns. So you all know that individual patterns are small bit and bit, right? And you put things together, you those different items from different places are also individual patterns. In the end, you have a set of patterns that could help you. Okay, enough theories. So let's talk about application. Yeah, so probably we'll have explained a bit too abstract. So let's see how this could be applied in the application. So first of all, about education. So I don't know if your teacher explained this to you. Did you? So this was a master program in TU Delft, and one of the most, let's say, unique or characteristic of TU Delft urbanism is that instead of working with projects, we were working with design methodologies. So like this course. So what your teacher is trying to teach you is a design method. It's not really a project, right? So before in our previous design studios or education, our studios are most of the time projects oriented. So for instance, today you design a library, tomorrow design airport, the day after you design housing, right? So those are with specific program. So after that studio, you know how to design a library, for instance, right? But this course, and TU Delft as well, so we were using studio as a case. It doesn't matter what was a project, what was a program. It's more like we appreciate this whole studio trajectory, and through this whole course, you master a design method with which you can work on any projects in the future. So you know, so it's more on the methodological level. So you get to know, right? So the value of that, I think, is a lot more than project itself. Because projects in your future professional development, you will encounter all different kinds of projects. And especially with design projects, you have different challenges all the time. So you always have to encounter new situations, come up with new solutions. However, what is most important and most fundamental is a design method. So how do you perceive an environment and do work? So in Delft, the master studios and the courses we were focusing on is teaching design method. And one of them is pattern language. So if you're interested in this, so I think in those years, every year they publish a pattern book. So if you search TU Delft pattern book, urbanism, you can find those things, you can download it. So how did we do this is, you know, in Delft, our master program is quite international. So students from all over the world come to Delft to study. So we ask students, like what your teacher asked you to do. So each of you in Delft, you need to write 5 individual patterns which you think are the most relevant or most interesting to you. So and then we figured out that students with different background write down different kind of patterns. So for instance, we have students from South America, and those students, for instance, from Brazil, or from Chile, for instance, the patterns they wrote are very much landscape oriented. So probably that was from their own daily experience. And the student from China, you know, the patterns they wrote are very much public space oriented and policy oriented. Probably that was what they are most familiar with, right? And then students from the Netherlands, for instance, what they wrote are very much water related. Because in the Netherlands, over 40% of the land was below the sea level. So how to deal with water and flooding is the most challenging aspect in the Netherlands. So students read more about that. So why I say this? So I want to say pattern is very flexible. So it could differ at different places. So it also comes with your own personal experiences and your professional experiences as well. So what you are most familiar with. So you tend to read about that. But of course it's important, but you also need to know it's very tolerant. It can also observe more different aspects. So therefore, it's a very powerful tool to work with when you are with a group of different stakeholders, you know, because people come from different backgrounds. You all work under this same methodological framework, and you bring in different understanding and insights, and you can communicate, you can work together, right? So this book, if you have a look at it, it probably will help you to think what are the aspects could be patterns. Yeah, so you can see in other countries what are the interesting aspects. So it helps you to broaden your horizon. And in Delft, so that was just a course, right? And for the master's thesis, so the second year is a graduation project. And some students particularly use pattern language as their own methodology. So for instance, this is a project developed by a student in Delft. He was working, looking at the post-war neighborhood. So in the Netherlands, after Second World War, there were a big boom in housing and places. So everything was built too fast. So what happened was, normally those neighborhoods are not that attractive to daily life. So what he did was, instead of using Christopher Alexander's pattern language, he developed his own pattern language. So what he did was, like what your teacher asks you to do, you go to the site, you observe, and you find out what are the problems. So like this picture, he used to indicate what were the problems. So he was saying, a picture indicates a particular problem or missing element in this area. So for instance, this green is very messy, is not well defined. So that was what he found. And then he write down the solution is here. So the number 40 pattern is called clear green. So means green space has to be defined clearly. And then he was writing what does it really mean. And he has a few diagrams to show a clear green, how to achieve a clear green. So those are the kind of solutions he proposed. So next week, when you hand in your patterns to your teacher, probably this could be one of the interesting way to do so. So you were using one picture depicting what was a problem on your side, and you think of how to solve that problem. And you write down the solution. What could be the way to solve that? And you explain that, how this solution could be worked in that area. And you draw a few diagrams to depict what do you mean, Yeah, so this is the first step, what you can do. And of course, later on, there is also how do you think your pattern could be related to other patterns, but that will come later. So probably this could be the first draft of your individual pattern. And then, as I explained, before you build a pattern into a pattern language like this, which is a huge mess, there is also something called clusters of patterns. So that is something called grouping. So what you could do is, after you write down the 10 patterns as a whole class, you can put all the patterns together and try to make some grouping. So maybe you can figure that some patterns are more about policy, some are more about the physical environment, some are more for the green areas, some are for public spaces. And you do some grouping. And then once you do some grouping, you will figure out this collective wisdom from the whole class. You are almost tackling all aspects of this whole area, right? So this is a grouping part. But maybe something are missing, so we can add it up later on. But so this is a grouping, yeah? Something about hospitality, something about clinic, whatever. So this is a TU Delft approach, and I think that your teacher has explained this to you as well. So I just give a short introduction how this could be used in your own studio. And another application of this in the education is from university, UCL, right? It's a very well-known university too. And in their bachelor program of architecture, there's a professor called Stephen Marshall. And in one of their bachelor course, so they particularly use, he said, Christopher Alexander's pattern language is used as a core device for understanding the urban form, components, and relationships. So in their bachelor program, they were also particularly using this. So what he did was how to recognize those patterns and how to show the process of how pattern languages adds up. So he asked students to do this. So what they did was, the first one, for instance, so he asked students, okay, if you see this neighborhood, so you see what is there is valuable, could be one individual pattern. So he said, a courtyard, that is kind of one individual pattern. And then he said, because of the existence of this courtyard, a web of shopping, so that's something related to program, right? That could also be one pattern. is a web of shopping emerges. So you are not only explaining individual pattern on its own, you are also explaining how individual patterns emerges because of another individual pattern. You get? And you use diagrams and drawings to explain this. So for this, you are actually showing your understanding of the process in that area. So this means, so a web of shopping emerges, helping to create a positive outdoor spaces. So positive outdoor spaces is another pattern, yeah? And then because of the existence of this, another higher level of pattern emerges, so that is an identifiable neighborhood. So once all of these are there, so the neighborhood itself becomes very attractive. Yeah, so you start to add people there, and then the last one, so finally, degrees of publicness and a structure which follows social space emerges. So again, so it's about how individual pattern emerges because of the other patterns, how these things adds up. So if you can make something like this, so you are showing the logic of your 10 individual patterns. So you know, if you just write down them in parallel, you don't really show the relationships, right? So it's just loose individual pattern, but if you show it in this way, you are actually already showing clusters of individual patterns. It's not a pattern language yet, because it's only one aspect, right? So that's what I mean by before coming to the pattern language, you have an intermediate step, that is clusters of patterns. Okay, so after you have shown this series of drawings to show the relationship, you can have a kind of concluding drawing and identifying how these individual patterns appears in the scenes, in the sceneries, and how these could be abstract and show the relations like this. So this was the kind of diagram that you can show the relation between your individual patterns. Yeah. So this is another example regarding education. And the third one is my own work. This was from my PhD thesis, and I think this could be very helpful for you for the next week assignment, because this was something similar to what your teacher asked you to do. So what I did was, there is a very vibrant historical areas in Wuhan where I did my bachelor and master. So where this rich Chinese life appears, it's very interesting. So I was thinking, so I want to make 20 individual patterns which represents and shows the most interesting and representative everyday life, public space in these whole areas. So that really is very contextual. So what I did was, first of all, I make a list, like your teacher asked you to do, these 20 ones. And the way I show it, I put them in the format of a postcard. Because the goal of pattern language is that later on you want to work with other people. So therefore, the format of your individual pattern has to be very handy. So it doesn't have to be a big one or all of them are writings. It's something like handy. You can work with other people. So I designed it in a kind of postcard. So how did I do that? So on the front page, so I have a number. So what is this pattern about? And it's eating in the streets. So this is what Chinese people do, like eating in the street. What does it mean? So I say, eating in the streets creates community and claims social identity on all urban scales. So I'm relating eating in this urban space across scales. So, eating is a behavior, but it has something to do with a space. But it's not only on one scale, it's a cross-scale impact. So, and then later on will explain. So, and then on this pattern on the front page, I use pictures to show what does it mean. So people have a very direct impression of this. And then on the back side of this postcard, I explain what does it mean on urban spaces. So I also write down practical implication. So when you have eating in the streets pattern, how this could influence urban space cross scale. So I was saying, okay, this could happen on a smaller scale at the street corner. So you are eating with your friends, enhance your daily activity. And it could also happen in a kind of neighborhood scale within the alleys. So people sometimes gather at the corner or on the streets. You kind of create a community atmosphere. And it could also happen among different communities. So for instance, in Wuhan, we have those very high-rise compound neighborhood. We also have those old traditional areas. Those are mixed in the city. However, in between those different kind of fabric, there is always one very famous streets where people sell the local food and people go there to eat. So therefore, this thing could also happen on the above neighborhood scale. And on the city scale, for instance, in Wuhan, there are some most famous representative place. Whenever people talk about Wuhan eating in the street, they know that area. So this has an influence on the city scale. So I was explaining, so this gives very positive impact of the urban space, and it could have different implication across scales. So you use those diagrams to show how this could benefit, how city could benefit from this pattern. So this is, for instance, is a behavior. Eating on the street is a behavior. And another example is a number 19th pattern I call the stairs. So when we talk about stairs is a physical element, right? It's not the behavior. So how stairs could become a pattern? So I'm not going to show different kind of stairs in this area, but I'm showing how people use stairs to create space. So how the local people creatively use stairs to create space. So I was explaining again on the picture saying stairs are crucial tectonics. They represent the lifestyles often with non-intentional design. So this comes very much from bottom up. So the local people have some wisdom. So I try to record their intervention. So what I did was, so talking about stairs, I'm saying, okay, so if you have a house, if you have stairs like this, you can create 2 floors in your own house. So you can sleep upstairs, you can use the downstairs for business or some interactions. Or some people have a house in Wuhan because stairs is something you use to densify the space, right? So for instance, in Wuhan, if you live on the ground floor, so what people did was they built another floor on their own and they use stairs to connect them, and they rent the whole top floor to other people. In a way, you can generate more money. Or some people use bigger stairs to connect different housing. So underneath those big stairs, you can have some communal space. So for instance, they have a small clinic there. So people in the neighborhood, they can go there. And the last one could be vertical, whatever. So you see the thinking, right? So it's not about stair as an element itself. It's about the stair as something, right? How that could help you with your design as a solution. So a pattern is about solution. What does it mean? What does it have value to the built-up environment for your design? Yeah? You see that's how you write your own patterns. So once I have done my individual patterns, what I did was I asked, you probably also know that different people, even if you are provided, you are offered with the same set of individual patterns, but when you build up pattern language, different people build different pattern language because they have their own understanding of these, right? So what I did was so this was a pattern language by myself, and I invited my 2 promoters to join a workshop. So probably later on you will have workshop too. So I asked my 2 promoters, 2 Dutch men. One of them is a professional urban designer, very famous in the Netherlands, and the other one is a sociologist who has a different perspective. So I asked both of them to sit there, and I gave them 20 individual patterns. I asked them to build their own pattern language, and then we discussed about it. And after that working session, you could see that designers have different perspectives than sociologists. However, the importance is not that they're different. It's about different people from different backgrounds come together, and you use this to explain your ideas, and you get to understand each other. So that's the most important. You use the same methodology, which is very flexible and adaptable, to get people from different backgrounds come together and to come to the same, not same, but come to talk and communicate, you know? So that's the essence of pattern language. Yeah, so about research. And now I'm going to say something about practice. So how this could be applied in a real design practice. So the first one is the Oregon experiment. So this one probably your teacher have explained to you already, and this is old. I'm not gonna talk more about this because today is about contemporary application, right? So I'm saying one of the very interesting work, I like it very much. This is really one of my most famous, favorite project. So this project was done by, do you know BOW? W-O-W and W-O-W. B-O-W, BOW, B-O-W, and W-O-W, BOW. So it's a Japanese firm, architecture firm. And the main principles, design principles are two professors. And one of them, so there are a couple as well, is architectural office. And the guy is a full professor at Tokyo University. And his wife, Momoyo Kajima, was a professor in Japan. And in 2016, he was appointed as a full professor at ETH. You know ETH? Zurich, ETH Zurich. So they have got this very interesting office. Probably you can have a look of that. This was a project they did together with their students. So the same as what you are doing now. You know, guys, what you are doing is very valuable and is very upfront. So what your teacher is trying to teach you is really something like a world front knowledge and methodology. And you are working on something very valuable too. And I do believe after your studio, if you can get it published like this, you will draw a lot of attention. That will definitely help you for your further professional development. So this was done by this Japanese BOW, yeah, with their students. So the same as you. So what happened was, in Japan, there was a big hurricane, right? It's called hurricane, and a big storm, and a lot of fishing. You all know Japan. It's a very tiny island, right? With everywhere is this sea. And so there are a lot of fishing villages around the coastline. So what happened was the hurricane destroyed a lot of damage